a mother, a daughter, 280 guests, and one slap that would destroy an empire. Taylor Gonzalez spent 34 years trying to earn her mother's love, a wealthy CEO who controlled everything and everyone around her. On Taylor's wedding day, she wore her military medals hidden inside her dress, a tribute to a teammate who died saving her life. Her mother saw them and demanded she remove them. Taylor refused, so her mother slapped her right there in front of everyone. The room went silent. Not one person stepped forward. But then Taylor's fiancé, a Navy SEAL commander, walked up to her mother, grabbed her wrist, and spoke 8 quiet words. Seconds later, 6 people in the back of the room rose to their feet. They didn't say anything. They didn't have to, because Taylor's mother recognized every single one of them. Her face turned white. We received this story directly from Taylor, and what she told us next will shock you. This is her story in her own words. My name is Taylor Gonzalez. I'm 34 years old, a military veteran who served 8 years before transitioning to a quieter life as a logistics coordinator. And until recently, I believed that some daughters are simply meant to be small, to take up as little space as possible in their mothers' lives. I was wrong, but it took me 3 decades to understand that. Growing up as the only child of a powerful CEO mother taught me one fundamental truth. Early survival meant compliance. My mother never hit me. She never screamed or threw things. What she did was far more subtle, and in many ways, far more damaging. She managed me the way she managed her company, with efficiency, strategy, and an unwavering focus on public image. Praise came, but only in front of others. My daughter is so accomplished, she would say, at dinner parties, her hand resting on my shoulder, like I was a trophy she had polished for display. In private, that warmth evaporated. Affection was rare and always conditional, offered only when I didn't inconvenience her schedule, her plans, or her carefully constructed image. I learned to read her moods the way other children learn to read books. I learned that asking for attention was a burden. I learned that needing her was an inconvenience. One memory still visits me at night, my high school graduation. I was 18 years old, wearing a cap and gown, clutching my honor roll certificate, scanning the crowd for my mother's face. She arrived late, 40 minutes into the ceremony, and found me backstage. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask how I felt. She positioned me against a neutral background, smiled for exactly 3 photographs, checked her phone, and told me she had a board meeting across town. She left before my name was called. I walked across that stage, accepted my diploma, and smiled for the official photographer. No one in the audience was there for me. That night, I sat alone in my childhood bedroom and made a decision I didn't fully understand at the time. I would find a place where I mattered for what I did not, whose daughter I was. The military gave me that. I didn't enlist to rebel against my mother. That would have required a confrontation I wasn't brave enough to have. I enlisted because I needed structure that wasn't about her. I needed to be judged by competence, not connections. For the first time in my life, no one cared who my mother was. No one cared about her company or her influence. They cared whether I could do my job, whether I could be trusted, whether I would show up for my team. And I did. I showed up every single day. The military gave me something else too, something I never expected. It gave me brothers and sisters who would die for me, and one who actually did. His name was Marcus. He was 26 years old, had a crooked smile and a terrible sense of humor, and he saved our entire unit during an ambush that should have killed us all. The last thing he said to me was, "Stay low, Gonzalez." Then he drew fire away from our position, and he didn't come back. I carry a medal for that day. Not because I'm proud there's no pride in surviving when someone else didn't. I carry it because Marcus deserves to be remembered. Because his sacrifice deserves to exist somewhere outside of official reports and folded flags. That medal isn't decoration. It's a debt I can never repay. My mother never asked about it. Whenever my military service came up, her discomfort was palpable. She would change the subject or make a vague comment about being glad I had moved past that phase. 8 years of service. Lives saved. Lives lost. A face. I stopped talking about it at home. But there was one person who always saw me even when I was trying my hardest to disappear. My grandmother. She was my mother's mother, though the two women couldn't have been more different. Where my mother was sharp and controlled, my grandmother was soft and present. She noticed things. She noticed me. I remember sitting with her on her porch when I was maybe 12 years old, feeling invisible and not knowing how to say it. She took my hand and said something I've carried ever since. "You don't have to be invisible, sweetheart. I see you." I didn't fully understand what she meant then, but those words became a kind of anchor proof that someone somewhere recognized I existed. My grandmother passed away 2 years ago. Before she died, she gave me a sealed envelope with instructions written on the front in her shaky handwriting. "Open this when you finally choose yourself." I've kept that letter unopened ever since. Part of me sensed it contained permission to stop shrinking, to stop managing my mother's feelings, to finally live a life that belonged to me. I decided I would open it on my wedding day, the day I would finally choose myself. That decision led me to Daniel. I met him at a military appreciation event about 18 months before the wedding. He was a Navy SEAL commander, decorated, respected, surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Everyone crowded around, eager to shake his hand or snap a photo. I didn't. Instead, I noticed what no one else seemed to see. Beneath the composure and the uniform, he looked exhausted, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. So when I finally approached him, I didn't ask about his service or his medals. I asked, "Are you okay? You look tired." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he laughed, not politely, but genuinely. "No one's asked me that in years," he said. "That's how it started. Not with admiration or strategy, but with a simple moment of being seen. Later, Daniel told me, 'Everyone sees my rank. You saw my nightmares.' I think that's when I knew I loved him. When I told my mother about the engagement, her reaction wasn't what I expected. She wasn't concerned about his background. His credentials were impressive enough to satisfy her. What unsettled her was something else entirely. This relationship existed outside her control. She hadn't arranged it. She hadn't approved it. She hadn't influenced it at all. For the first time in my life, I had chosen something that was entirely mine. And I think even then, she began planning how to take it back. I thought my wedding would finally make me visible. I didn't know yet. My grandmother had already made sure of that from beyond the grave. The wedding venue was breathtaking. A restored estate with manicured gardens, crystal chandeliers, and enough white roses to fill a greenhouse. 280 guests filled the reception hall champagne glasses, catching the afternoon light, laughter echoing off marble floors. By any measure, it was the wedding of the year, and I had never felt more like a stranger at my own celebration. As I moved through the crowd in my gown, I started counting. How many of these people did I actually know? 30 maybe. The rest were faces I had seen in business magazines or political news segments, board members from my mother's company, donors to causes I had never heard of, industry leaders whose names I couldn't pronounce. I overheard conversations about quarterly earnings pending legislation, a merger that would reshape the tech sector. Not a single person asked about Daniel's family. Not a single person asked about us. I watched my mother work the room like she was hosting a shareholders meeting. She moved from group to group with practiced precision, touching elbows, laughing at the right moments, steering conversations toward topics that showcased her influence. Daniel's parents sat at a table near the back, looking polite, but visibly uncomfortable. No one had introduced themselves. No one seemed to notice they existed. This wasn't a wedding. It was a networking event with vows. I felt the familiar guilt rise in my chest. My mother had paid for everything. The venue, the catering, the flowers, that probably cost more than my car. How could I complain? How could I feel anything but grateful? But standing there in that beautiful room, surrounded by strangers who saw me only as an extension of my mother's brand, I understood something clearly for the first time. Gratitude and autonomy were at war inside me, and gratitude had been winning for 34 years. The battle lines became visible during the final dress fitting 3 days before the ceremony. I had made a decision about my medals. I didn't want to display them prominently that would feel performative attention-seeking, but I couldn't leave them behind either. So I had them sewn into the inner lining of my dress, positioned near my heart. They would be invisible to everyone else, visible only when I moved a certain way. A private tribute. A way of carrying Marcus with me on the most important day of my life. My mother noticed immediately. She was examining the dress when her fingers brushed the slight bulge in the fabric. She pulled the lining aside and froze. "What is this?" I explained calmly. The medals were for me, not for show. One of them represented Marcus, a teammate who had died. I wanted him there with me. Her response came without hesitation. "This is a wedding, Taylor, not a military parade. Take them out. The guests won't understand." I told her I wasn't wearing them for the guests. She tried a different angle. "People will ask questions. They'll want to know why you're carrying around reminders of trauma on what should be a happy day. Is that really the image you want to project?" "Your guests don't need to see your trauma." That's what she actually meant. My service, my sacrifice, my loss. These were inconvenient narratives. They didn't fit the curated image she had constructed. A daughter with medals meant a daughter with complicated stories, and complicated stories couldn't be controlled. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said quietly, but firmly, "The medals stay." Something shifted in her expression. It was subtle, a flicker of surprise quickly masked. I had never refused her before, not directly, not without apology or negotiation. This small act of defiance was a crack in the foundation of our entire relationship, and we both knew it. Throughout this exchange, Daniel stood nearby, saying nothing. My mother glanced at him several times, clearly expecting him to intervene, to encourage me toward compromise. His silence seemed to confirm her assumption that he was passive, perhaps even weak. She was wrong. I didn't know it then, but Daniel had spent the past 18 months preparing for this day, in ways I couldn't have imagined. Using connections from his military career, he had quietly investigated my mother. What he found was a pattern, a trail of people whose lives she had damaged. A former HR manager who had been fired after reporting toxic workplace behavior. A startup founder whose company was bankrupted by a frivolous lawsuit my mother filed just to eliminate competition. A former secretary who had been blacklisted from the entire industry for reasons that were never made clear. 6 of those people were at the wedding right now. I had noticed them earlier, strangers seated in the back corners, watching but not mingling. I assumed they were distant business associates, people my mother had invited to fill seats. I was wrong about that too. Daniel had found them. He had invited them, and he had briefed them with a simple instruction. If something happens, you'll know when to stand. He wasn't planning revenge. He was creating insurance. An hour before the ceremony, I finally opened my grandmother's letter. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. The paper was thin, the handwriting shaky, but unmistakable. The words were simple and devastating. "I know what my daughter became. I watched it happen, and I couldn't stop it. I tried to love her into kindness, but some people choose who they are. I want you to know, Taylor, it wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. You were a child who deserved a mother, and instead, you got a manager. I always saw you, sweetheart. Even when she made you invisible, I saw you." My vision blurred. I had to read the final lines twice before I understood them. "I've left you something that will protect you when you need it. The lawyer will explain when the time comes. Trust yourself. You are stronger than you know." I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my dress, right next to the medals. I didn't understand what my grandmother had left me, but I felt her presence like a hand on my shoulder, steadying me for whatever came next. The ceremony was about to begin. I stepped into the main hall and saw my mother near the entrance, greeting a photographer with her practiced smile. But as I watched, her eyes drifted toward the back of the room, toward those strangers in the corner. For just 1 second, her smile faltered. Her gaze sharpened, and I saw something I had never seen on my mother's face before: fear. I should have recognized that fear for what it was, a warning. But in that moment, I was too focused on getting through the ceremony, too hopeful that the day might still belong to me. I was wrong. Minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, I retreated to the bridal suite for a final moment alone. I needed to breathe. I needed to steady myself. I stood before the mirror, touching the place where my grandmother's letter rested against my heart, feeling the slight weight of the medals beneath the fabric. I was ready. Then the door opened. My mother entered without knocking. Her expression was composed, her smile perfectly calibrated for anyone who might be watching. But we were alone now, and as the door closed behind her, the mask slipped. Her eyes went straight to my dress, to the place where she knew the medals were hidden. "I see you didn't listen to me." I said nothing. There was nothing to say that I hadn't already said. Her voice shifted. What began as disappointment hardened into something colder. "Remove them, now. I'm not asking any more, Taylor. You're embarrassing me in front of everyone who matters." I met her gaze in the mirror. My voice was steady when I spoke. "This isn't about you, Mother. This is my wedding. These medals are part of who I am." "Who you are?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Who you are is my daughter. Everything you have, this venue, this dress, these guests, exists because of me. And you want to ruin it with your little military costume?" I turned to face her directly. "Marcus died saving my life. I'm not taking off his medal to make your donors more comfortable." Something changed in her face. The controlled CEO disappeared, replaced by something raw and unfamiliar. I had never spoken to her like this. I had never refused without apologizing, never stood firm without eventually backing down. My defiance, quiet as it was, broke something in her carefully maintained composure. Neither of us knew that a microphone from the ceremony space was still live. The audio technician had left it on during setup, and now fragments of our conversation were carrying through the speakers into the main hall. 280 guests could hear my mother's voice rising in anger. They could hear me refusing to yield. Later, I would learn that people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging glances, pretending they couldn't make out the words. The exposure had already begun. My mother took a step toward me. Her voice dropped to something between a hiss and a whisper. "You will take those medals off, or I will—" "You'll what?" The question hung between us. I had never interrupted her before. I had never challenged her so directly. 34 years of compliance, of shrinking, of absorbing her criticism in silence. And now, on the day she had designed to showcase her success, her own daughter was refusing to cooperate. She couldn't tolerate it. The slap came fast. Not calculated, not theatrical, instinctive. Her palm connected with my cheek before I could register what was happening. The sound was sharp, sudden, and impossibly loud. Because of the microphone, every single guest in that hall heard it. Silence followed. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I stood completely still. My cheek burned, but the physical pain was distant, almost irrelevant. What I felt instead was clarity. A strange crystalline understanding of everything I had spent my life trying not to see. In that moment, time seemed to slow. I watched my mother's expression shift from rage to realization. Her hand was still raised. Her eyes widened as the magnitude of her mistake registered. She had lost control. She had lost it publicly, and she couldn't take it back. But what wounded me more than the slap was what happened in the silence that followed. No one came. Through the partially open door, I could see into the main hall. Guests sat frozen in their seats. Some looked at their shoes. Others whispered behind their hands. A few actually stood and walked toward the exits, not to help but to avoid being associated with what they had just witnessed. Not one person intervened. Not one person said, "This is wrong." I understood then that my mother's power had never been just about wealth or status. It was about silence. It was about the complicity of everyone who benefited from looking away. These people, her donors, her board members, her carefully curated network, had probably witnessed versions of her cruelty before. They had chosen comfort over conscience. They had chosen access over integrity. And they were choosing it again right now, while I stood in my wedding dress with my mother's handprint burning on my face. I didn't cry. I didn't apologize. I didn't run. I stood absolutely still and let the silence speak for itself. My mother expected submission tears pleading the familiar pattern of Taylor absorbing the blow and smoothing things over. Or she expected spectacle screaming accusations, something she could later dismiss as hysteria. Instead, she got neither. She got stillness, and that stillness became its own kind of power. Then the door opened wider. Daniel walked in. Every person in that hall watched him enter. I could feel their expectations shifting. They anticipated confrontation, raised voices, perhaps even violence. Daniel was a decorated Navy SEAL. He had the training and the capacity to end this situation in seconds. My mother seemed to brace herself for an attack. But Daniel didn't move toward her. He stopped just inside the doorway and looked at me first. His gaze was steady, calm, and filled with something that made my eyes sting. It said everything words couldn't. I'm here. You're not alone. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Then he turned to my mother. His expression wasn't anger. It was something far more devastating. He looked at her the way one might look at a cornered animal that doesn't realize it has already lost. Not with hatred, not with aggression, with pity. The room held its breath. That silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard. And then Daniel opened his mouth and said 8 words that would shatter everything my mother had spent her life building. Daniel stepped forward. His movement was unhurried, deliberate, the kind of controlled calm that comes from years of training in situations far more dangerous than this. He reached out and took my mother's wrist. Not aggressively, not violently, firmly, the way you might stop someone from walking off the edge of a cliff they couldn't see. My mother tried to pull away, but his grip held. Her eyes widened not from pain, but from the unfamiliar experience of being physically restrained. People didn't touch her without permission. People didn't hold her in place. Daniel leaned in close. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. The words were meant for her ears, but I was close enough to hear them. Your victims are here. They remember everything. 8 words. That was all it took. The color drained from my mother's face. I watched it happen, watched the blood retreat from her cheeks, watched her confident posture collapse inward, watched her eyes dart frantically around the room as the meaning of those words registered. She was searching, scanning the crowd, looking for something or someone. For the first time in my memory, my mother looked small. Then it began. In the back of the room, a woman stood up. She was perhaps 50 years old, professionally dressed, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak. She didn't move forward. She simply rose from her seat and stood there looking directly at my mother. A few seats away, a man did the same. Then another woman. Then 2 more people near the far wall. 6 strangers. 6 people I didn't recognize. One by one, they rose to their feet in complete silence. My mother's hand flew to her throat. She recognized them. I could see it in her face, the dawning horror of understanding exactly who these people were. Daniel's voice was soft beside me. Former employees, former partners, people she destroyed. I found them, Taylor. I invited them. I stared at him, unable to process what he was telling me. For 18 months, while I had been planning a wedding and hoping for my mother's approval, Daniel had been conducting his own quiet investigation. He had tracked down the people my mother had hurt. The careers she had ended, the lives she had damaged. The voices she had silenced, and he had brought them here. Not to attack, not to accuse, simply to witness. The HR manager my mother had fired after the woman reported a hostile work environment. The startup founder whose company had been bankrupted by a frivolous intellectual property lawsuit my mother filed simply to eliminate competition. The assistant who had been blacklisted from the entire industry because she knew too much about how my mother operated. These weren't an angry mob. They weren't here for revenge. They were witnesses. Their silence was their testimony. By standing, they were saying what words couldn't. We see you, we remember, and now everyone else sees too. The room understood. I could feel the shift in energy, the realization spreading through the crowd that this wasn't just one woman's grievance against her mother. This was a pattern of cruelty and control that extended far beyond family dynamics. My mother hadn't just managed me, she had managed everyone, and some of those people had finally been given a chance to be seen. Something broke open inside me. Not anger, something cleaner than that. Something like clarity. I walked to the microphone. My hands weren't shaking. My voice, when it came, was steady. I'm not going to stand here and list accusations, I said. That's not why I'm speaking. The room was silent. Every eye was on me. My grandmother left me a letter before she died. I opened it today for the first time. There's one line I want to share with you. I paused. My voice caught slightly, but I pushed through. She wrote that she knew what her daughter became. She watched it happen, and she said, "It wasn't my fault." The silence that followed was different from every silence that had come before. This wasn't the silence of complicity, of people choosing comfort over conscience. This was the silence of recognition, of understanding, of witnesses finally acknowledging what they had always known but never admitted. My mother stood frozen near the back of the room. She had just heard her own mother's judgment delivered from beyond the grave, amplified through a microphone broadcast to every person whose opinion she had ever cared about. The image she had spent decades crafting was crumbling in real time, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. I took a breath and spoke again. We're going to have our wedding now. Everyone who wants to stay is welcome. Everyone who doesn't, I understand. No one left. But no one approached my mother either. She stood alone in the corner of the room she had paid for, surrounded by the people she had spent her career trying to impress, utterly and completely isolated. The ceremony proceeded. It was simple now, stripped of pretense. Just Daniel and me standing before an officiant, making promises we actually meant. When Daniel spoke his vows, his voice was rough with emotion. I've waited my whole life for someone who saw me, not my uniform. Everyone else looked at my rank, my medals, my service record. You looked at me and asked if I was okay. He took my hands. You didn't save me because I'm strong, Taylor. You saved me because you're kind, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel invisible again. I said my vows through tears, the good kind finally. Throughout the ceremony, I was aware of my mother in my peripheral vision. She hadn't left. She stood in the margins, watching her face, a mask I couldn't read. She didn't know how to lose. She didn't know how to walk away from a room where she wasn't the center of attention. But for once, no one was looking at her. For once, she was the one who was invisible. The wedding continued, but I noticed my mother didn't leave. She stood in the corner watching, waiting, as if she still believed she could regain control. She had no idea that the final blow was still coming, and it would arrive from someone who was already dead. After the ceremony ended, and the last guest departed, I did something that surprised everyone who knew me. I did nothing. No angry phone calls, no public statements, no family meetings to hash out what had happened. I simply withdrew from my mother's life completely. Daniel and I left for our honeymoon, and when we returned, I didn't reach out. I didn't respond to her messages. I didn't smooth things over or explain her behavior to concerned relatives. For the first time in 34 years, I stopped performing the invisible labor that had defined my entire relationship with my mother. I had spent my whole life being the buffer between her and consequences. When she offended someone, I apologized on her behalf. When she damaged a relationship, I repaired it quietly. When her cruelty became visible, I helped make it invisible again. That work stopped the day I closed the door on my wedding reception. Without my silent compliance, my mother's behavior became visible in ways it never had been before. The 280 people who witnessed the slap talked to other people. The 6 witnesses Daniel had gathered began sharing their stories, not to journalists or media outlets, just to colleagues, friends, industry contacts. The whisper network that exists in every professional community. Activated, and for once, my mother couldn't control the narrative. Over the following months, her world quietly contracted. Invitations to exclusive events stopped arriving. Board members became unavailable for meetings, citing scheduling conflicts that never resolved. A major partnership deal she had been cultivating for years fell through with vague explanations about strategic realignment. No scandal broke. No lawsuit was filed. There was just erosion trust evaporating, doors closing, the kind of professional death that happens not with a bang, but with silence. 4 months after the wedding, I saw the headline while scrolling through the morning news. My mother's name followed by words I never expected to read. Steps down as CEO, citing personal reasons. I stared at the screen for a long time. I waited for triumph to arrive, or perhaps sadness. Neither came. What I felt instead was something closer to relief. The relief of finally being free from someone else's narrative, someone else's image, someone else's constant need for control. But my grandmother's final gift was still waiting. 3 weeks after the wedding, a lawyer I didn't recognize called me. He said he represented my grandmother's estate. A separate will file privately with a different firm, unknown to everyone in the family, including my mother. He asked if we could meet. What he revealed changed everything. My grandmother had left me 15% of my mother's company. 15% enough for a seat on the board if I wanted it. The bequest had been conditional structured to activate only upon my marriage or my 40th birthday, whichever came first. She had created this arrangement 10 years before she died, updating it quietly, keeping it completely secret. I finally understood. My grandmother had seen what her daughter became. She had watched it happen and been powerless to stop it. But she had spent a decade building a safety net for me, a form of protection that would activate only when I was ready to claim my own life. This inheritance wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishment. It was about ensuring that I would never be completely powerless against my mother again. I now had real influence over my mother's world. With those shares, I could attend board meetings, vote on major decisions, make my presence felt in the company she had built. My mother knew the power existed. Her lawyers had certainly informed her by now. She was living with the knowledge that her own daughter held a significant stake in everything she had created. But I chose not to use it. The shares sat in trust untouched. I attended no meetings. I made no moves. I let the uncertainty speak for itself. One night, Daniel asked me, "Do you ever think about using those shares?" I considered the question carefully. "No," I said. "Living well is enough, but she'll spend every day wondering if I will." 6 months after the wedding, my mother appeared at our door. I barely recognized her. She looked smaller, somehow diminished in ways that had nothing to do with physical size. The armor of wealth and status that had always surrounded her seemed thinner, more fragile. Her clothes were still expensive. Her posture still practiced, but something essential had shifted. "I need to talk," she said. I studied her for a long moment. I searched myself for anger, for the familiar desire to wound back, to finally say all the things I had swallowed for 3 decades. I found neither. What I found instead was a quiet certainty, the knowledge that I no longer needed anything from her. "I don't think we have anything to say anymore." I closed the door, gently. No slam, no drama, just a boundary, finally established. Through the window, I watched her stand on the porch for a full minute before turning and walking away. In that moment, I understood something important. She hadn't come to apologize. She had come to regain access to her daughter, to the narrative, to some measure of control over how this story would be told. And for the first time in my life, my answer had simply been no. Daniel and I built our life far from the spotlight. I kept my medals in a small display case in our living room, not hidden, not displayed prominently. just present like the memories they represented. Every year on the anniversary of Marcus's death, I light a candle. Daniel sits with me, not speaking, just present. That's enough. One evening, watching the sunset from our porch, Daniel asked, "Any regrets?" I thought for a moment. I regret the years I spent trying to earn love that was never actually available, but I don't regret how I handled the end. I didn't destroy her. I just stopped protecting her from herself. I took his hand and felt the weight of everything we had built together. I didn't destroy my mother's empire. I didn't need to. I just stopped holding it up and discovered that my own two hands were finally free. Taylor's story didn't end with destruction. It ended with freedom. She didn't bring her mother's empire crashing down. She didn't file lawsuits or give interviews or seek public vindication. She simply stopped carrying a weight that was never hers to bear. And in doing so, she discovered something profound. The people who try to make us small only have power as long as we keep shrinking. For 34 years, Taylor believed that love had to be earned through obedience, that her value depended on someone else's approval, that staying small was the price of staying safe. It took a slap in front of 280 people to finally shatter that illusion. But here's what makes Taylor's story truly remarkable. It wasn't the public humiliation that set her free. It was the quiet decision that came after. The decision to stop protecting someone who had never protected her. The decision to finally choose herself. There's a lesson in this story that goes beyond revenge or justice. It's about recognizing when the relationships we fight hardest to preserve are the ones causing us the most harm. Taylor's mother wasn't a monster in the traditional sense. She was a woman who valued image over intimacy, control over connection. And Taylor spent 3 decades trying to earn warmth from someone who had forgotten how to give it. Many of us do the same thing. We pour ourselves into relationships that only take. We shrink our needs to accommodate people who never accommodate ours. We mistake tolerance for love and silence for peace. Taylor's grandmother understood this. That's why she left not just money, but a message. She wanted Taylor to know that the pattern wasn't her fault, that some people choose who they become, and we are not obligated to keep paying the price for their choices. The inheritance wasn't about revenge. It was about protection. It was about giving Taylor something her mother never gave her: options. But perhaps the most powerful part of Taylor's journey is what she chose not to do. She had 15% of her mother's company. She could have wielded that power like a weapon. She could have attended board meetings, challenged decisions, made her presence felt in painful ways. Instead, she let the shares sit untouched. She chose peace over punishment. She chose her own life over her mother's downfall. That takes a different kind of strength. The strength to walk away. The strength to close a door gently instead of slamming it. The strength to say, "I don't need to destroy you. I just need to stop letting you destroy me." If Taylor's story resonates with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever wondered whether you were asking for too much by wanting to be seen, know that you're not alone. And know that it's never too late to choose yourself. We want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with someone who refused to respect them? Have you ever walked away from a relationship that was slowly making you smaller? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story moved you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another story like Taylor's. Every subscription helps us bring more of these powerful, real-life accounts to people who need them. Hit the like button if you believe that choosing yourself is never selfish, it's survival. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, you don't have to tear down anyone's empire to be free. Sometimes you just have to stop holding it up. Until next time.